Police! Search warrant! Open the door!
The moment it was game over for Clayton Lewis.
Police! Search warrant! Open the door!
The former all-white star arrested and hauled away from his Sydney home in the middle of the night last year for his role in an A-League spot-fixing scheme.
A scandal has erupted in Australia.
Shock and dismay. Those are the overwhelming reactions tonight.
The A-League is tonight in damage control.
Bombshell claims of corruption, accused of deliberately conceding yellow cards.
Last week, Clayton was sentenced in a Sydney court and now faces a lifetime football ban. But sadly, the problem's not over for the game.
Amateur on the field, New Zealand's National Football League has become a magnet for hundreds of millions of dollars in offshore betting.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the link between football and organised crime. What really happens when sports stars, gambling addiction and competition manipulation collide? It's a growing issue on the global sporting stage, and New Zealand isn't exempt.
I was really staggered to learn that international match fixers are targeting New Zealand players. It's not unusual to see $1 million dropped on a game, like bet on just a single game in the league. When you've got this amount of money being wagered on a sport, then the opportunity is there for betting corruption. Players are essentially groomed, so once you're kind of on the hook, you feel like you owe them something, then they might be like, oh, can you just do this one thing for me in a game?
That's RNZ's in-depth sports correspondent Dana Johansson, who has covered the issue extensively. And later she will discuss how spot fixing and illegal betting are emerging in New Zealand. But first, fallen Kiwi soccer star Clayton Lewis and how he destroyed his career in Australia for a bet. Dana was in Sydney for his sentencing last week.
This story just sort of erupted in May last year with the arrest of 3 A-League players, and it didn't take long before those players were identified as Clayton Lewis, the former All-White, and his Macarthur FC teammates Kieran Backus and Ulysses Davia. Now, they were accused of being part of a competition manipulation scheme, which is essentially spot fixing in games to facilitate illegal betting. And the New South Wales Police, they alleged that the ringleader of this operation was the captain, Davia, and he was in cahoots with a South American crime figure who was directing things from afar. It really kind of rocked the A-League. This is the biggest sports corruption scandal in Australian, all of their football codes really, since the Ryan Tandy affair back in 2012.
Former league player Ryan Tandy has been found guilty of match fixing. The one-time Bulldog escaped a prison term but could face a life ban from the NRL.
And this one was quite significant in that it's kind of the first time that the organised crime element's been involved. Certainly there's been a few cases of insider betting, which is when the players themselves might tip off their friends and family or even themselves and make a bet on the competition they're playing in. But this one was quite significant for the involvement of those organised crime figures.
Why Clayton, and what exactly did he do?
So the evidence that was presented in court and in the agreed summary of facts is that he was basically targeted because he was known to be a gambler, he was known to be influenceable. So essentially Davia, who was arranging things, he had a plan in place already for that game. This game was against Sydney FC in December 2023, and they were planning to get 3 yellow cards, and the crime figure overseas was going to place a number of bets on Macarthur FC to get 3 yellow cards. But I understand the odds shifted, and so Davia got a last-minute sort of call to hastily rearrange things, and another teammate suggested that they could bring in Clayton Lewis because he was known to be a gambler and therefore seen as potentially being more influenceable. So that was a really kind of sad thing. There are so many sort of sliding doors moments within this story, but that's got to be the biggest one, and that literally a game day decision. He agreed to do it, and so he conceded a yellow card and was paid $10,000 $10,000 to do so.
Yellow card, Clayton Lewis, so he joins Uli Davila.
And the ironic things about the story is that the teammate that actually suggested they bring Clayton into this scheme, he tried desperately hard to get a yellow card throughout that game and didn't manage to do so. And he was never charged because he didn't get the yellow card and he didn't get paid for it. So even though he was the one that sort of connected the two and made it and had full knowledge of this operation being in place, he was never charged.
But Clayton did get the yellow card and did score the $10,000. Ultimately, however, it proved an own goal. Perhaps the cops in charge of the investigation put it best when they said that it
brought down the integrity of not only themselves and the club that they play for, but unfortunately the sport.
And all for $10,000.
That is incredibly insignificant when you consider the damage.
How did the authorities cotton on to this? Was it because of this weird betting or numbers of bets? How did this scandal emerge?
Law enforcement agencies everywhere are really reliant on overseas gambling monitoring sites to be able to pick up these strange, suspicious patterns in betting, and that's exactly what occurred here. Unfortunately, the fixers did not do a good job of covering their tracks very well. They placed about 50 bets all at the same time, about 11:30 in the morning Australian time, for the same outcome within the same betting platform. So different accounts, but the same betting platform. And so that immediately raised red flags. And so they have processes in place where they then have to inform their oversight commission, which in this case was the UK Gambling Commission. And then they tipped off Australian authorities and they launched what was called Strike Force Beacon View, which is sounds like a very serious name for an operation.
And they actually arrested. It was quite a dramatic arrest, wasn't it? Middle of the night. Talk us through this with Clayton.
Yeah, that's right. They actually took a number of months to investigate it. It took a while to sort of unravel and be able to prove their case, who was actually responsible and who was the people on the ground pulling this off. And so it wasn't until about 2 weeks after the Macarthur FC season finished in May last year that they carried out a series of dawn raids across Sydney, and it was quite dramatic footage.
Police! Search warrant! Open the door!
They actually had full tactical teams. Now, there was some criticism in court from Clayton Lewis's lawyers about whether that was really necessary. She mentioned that he was, unfortunately now, has been diagnosed with PTSD from that experience of having his apartment stormed while he was sleeping. And you could imagine it would just be so terrifying. And then there's also the indignity then of that footage going all around the world, which is what it did because it was such a massive story.
Sentencing last week.
Clayton Lewis remained expressionless as he appeared in this Sydney court this afternoon. The community magistrate overseeing proceedings calling his offending reckless, but he said that it remained at the low end of the spectrum.
What happened? Because he doesn't have a conviction, is that correct?
That's right. So both Lewis and his teammate or former teammate now, Kieran Backus, they pled guilty to a single charge of corrupting a betting outcome, and they managed to escape without a conviction. So they were handed a 2-year community release order, which is essentially like a good behaviour bond. Provided they stay out of the trouble for the next 2 years, there'll be no formal conviction entered onto their record. But he's still fighting for his career, and you arguably say he's been punished more so outside the courtroom than what was ever going to be handed down within it.
It's more than a yellow card, I understand. He could face a lifetime ban, is that correct?
Yeah, so his lawyer revealed in court that Football Australia have served him what they call a show cause notice. So there's still a disciplinary process to go through with Football Australia, but a lifetime ban would be devastating in that not only will it mean he'll never play again, it also means that he can't be involved in the sport at any level, and including coaching. If he goes on to have kids, he won't be able to coach his kids in a formal club environment, refereeing, even attending some games. So to ban someone for a sport, it's hugely debilitating.
It's huge. It's their life. I want to know, though, the role of gambling in this and players who are gamblers. How problematic is this?
What the case really highlighted was that really how he got reeled into the scheme was because he was known to be a gambling addict. And that's of huge concern to sports authorities because we know that gambling addiction is increasingly more prevalent in young male athletes, and so they can really be targeted. And I spoke to the worldwide expert really in this space and match fixing and corruption, Declan Hill, and he said it's time he's Canadian, but he's very clued in on what's happening on the ground in New Zealand, and he said it's time for a serious conversation about gambling addiction in young men.
Here's some of that interview with Declan Hill.
There's a problem that almost nobody speaks about in New Zealand society, which is the prevalence and the extent of gambling addiction. But of all the demographics, the really serious one is young athletes, particularly young male athletes. And gambling is the absolute easiest way of getting young athletes to fix, because they lose all their money, and then the bookmaker comes and says, hey, you want to get yourself out of a problem? Just work for me. Gambling addiction is rife in sports. I mean, I literally could sit here for the next half an hour and just drop the names of prominent athletes who are gambling addicts. And we could just go on. Phil Mickelson, Michael Jordan, Wayne Rooney, Michael Owen, Gianluigi Buffon. It just goes on and on and on. The better you are as an athlete, the more likely you are to be a gambling addict.
He says match fixing happens worldwide in nearly every sport, and the problem is only getting worse.
It's linked to the globalized sports gambling world, and the rewards you can get for fixing, for corrupting your game or your event are just so large in that globalized sports gambling market compared to the salaries that people can get regularly in their sports leagues, that it's just happening in almost every single sports league around the world.
This person who had a young baby had not been paid, and so he and his mate devised to basically concede yellow cards, and they would place their bets themselves. So there was no organised crime element. But yeah, that was the second big betting corruption scandal in the space of a year. There's been big calls for Football Australia to really up its game in terms of education, because that's a big part of the puzzle, and that's the same in New Zealand, is that education is seen as basically the biggest deterrent to this happening, because it's pretty hard to stop organised crime groups from targeting players and finding a way to make a buck out of sport, but ensuring that the players are fully aware of the risks. Because talking to some people on the ground, I think players are aware that to do this would be very much against the rules of the sport and a huge breach of ethics. But I don't think people are fully aware that this is criminal activity. This could get you, the police knocking on your door at 5 a.m. and busting in.
And conviction or jail time or whatever.
Absolutely.
New Zealand is not immune, because our National Football League has become very attractive, I understand, to offshore betting companies.
Now, new data shows staggering sums being gambled through online betting operators in Asia. As the stakes rise, officials warn the danger of corruption lurks close to the surface, with reports international match fixers are targeting Kiwi players.
You've done a big story on this. Why? What's the problem here? Talk us through it.
Yeah, really interesting. I guess the gateway to looking into this space was the Clayton Lewis case, and it made me sort of reflect on what's going on the ground here, because you tend to think of New Zealand as being a bit immune to this, and there's betting corruption out there, but you kind of think they won't be interested in our competitions.
Never.
But I was really staggered to learn that the Men's National League, so that's our amateur competition here, a huge amount of money is bet on this competition through these overseas gambling websites.
How much?
212 million.
Ooh.
So this, and to clarify, this does not include the Phoenix or Auckland FC in the A-League. These are teams like Birkenhead United and Western Springs, and it's not unusual to see $1 million dropped on a game, like bet on just a single game in the league. So 212 million a season, between 500 and 1.4 million each game. It's incredible numbers. And so
that's huge.
That doesn't mean that match fixing is happening, but what it does mean is that it increases the risk, because when you've got this amount of money being wagered on a sport, then the opportunity is there for betting corruption.
And you talk about micro bets. What are micro bets, and how does that affect the game?
Yeah, so it's micro bets kind of leave it open to spot fixing. So these are kind of small moments in a game. So it's not like you're just betting on the outcome of a result anymore. Some of these websites, and I can name a few of them, like Bet365 and BetPlay, the big players, they'll offer sort of more than 200 betting options on a single game. So you can bet on anything from the scoreline at a certain point in time in the game, or it's like tiny things like who's going to who's going to have the first touch, how many throw-ins there'll be in a game, how many yellow cards there'll be in a game, how many shots on goal, all those sorts of things. And it's used as a device to hook people in, to keep them betting every couple of minutes and chase that adrenaline rush.
Here's Declan Hill on micro-betting.
What the gambling companies are trying to do is change fundamentally the way people bet on a game. So people of my generation, we're used to the idea of people betting on the outcome of a game or something really significant in a match happening. But what the bookmaking companies are trying to do is get people to place bets every 2 to 3 minutes during the game, a long series of micro bets. So the adrenaline rush in the punter never gets down, never dies down. The rational brain is never able to have a chance to take over. So it's an addictive whirl that they're trying to do. That's why they have all those micro bets.
They're dangerously easy to fix. And so that's where the opportunity lies to I guess, kind of manipulate these outcomes. And what we saw in the A-League was a perfect example with those yellow cards.
Yellow card. There's now their 16th yellow card. Way more than any other side in the competition.
Are we attractive because we are sort of off the beaten track? We've got a different time zone. We're not played well as, players. And does that make us an easy target for this sort of carry on?
Yeah, there's a Europol report actually that's the kind of environments in which match fixing thrives are these kind of lower level competitions where there's kind of not as much interest in them, not as much fan interest, not as much spectator interest, and also the players are amateur, which means they could be more corruptible, and not just players, officials as well. They're not paid for their involvement. So a lot of our domestic competitions in all sports meet those factors, but you layer into that other risk factors in New Zealand specifically, and that is our time zone. So we've basically got a monopoly every kind of 2-hour window every Saturday afternoon where we're the only country where there's live sport on for people to bet on. So that means when people wake up in the morning in Asia and want to get their fix, then they'll tune into the football or basketball or table tennis. And the other thing is that we've just seen a massive spike or increase in live streaming of sport.
Of course.
Which is, it's a great vehicle for sports to be able to make their sport more accessible to fans without, the big broadcast costs. Some of these sports can't attract broadcast deals anyway, so live streaming is a great option. But it just means that people over in Asia or South America can tune in and watch the games, and then it's going to increase the betting, the wagering that's going on as well.
Do we know if any Kiwi players here have been shoulder tapped or someone slid into their DMs? I'm not sure how they even get in touch, but to say, look, would you throw a game or get a yellow card or give us a heads up or something?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's happening a lot, but I was really surprised at the rate it is occurring. I think the New Zealand Professional Footballers Association said they get maybe a handful of reports each year, but this is likely to be underreported as well because obviously the concern is that people are sort of giving into this and not going to then therefore report. But what we have seen is that there's kind of a spectrum of sophistication is how it was described to me by the Players Association, and that it might be something as simple as a message through Instagram and a photo with a table full of cash and being like, this could be all yours, which is kind of like not that credible.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's kind of like the equivalent of the Nigerian prince who wants to get their fortune out of the country, and if you could just help them out. But the ones you have to worry about are those more elaborate attempts where players are essentially groomed. So it might just be an approach from someone claiming to be very well connected in the game, and they might have contacts with overseas clubs or pose as an agent, and they start with offers of sponsorship or free gear, or maybe I can get you a trial at this club or a college scholarship. And then once you're kind of on the hook, you feel like you owe them something, then they might be like, oh, can you just do this one thing for me in a game? No one to find out, there's no risk. And this will inevitably help you in your career. So that's kind of how they get you on the hook. And so we have heard of a couple of approaches in those instances. Fortunately, in these cases, the players have sort of seen the red flags and reported it. But I was really staggered to learn that international match fixers are targeting New Zealand players.
We've just had Clayton sentenced in Australia. Have we had anyone sentenced for it in New Zealand yet?
No, there's been no cases of match fixing or spot fixing or any type of competition manipulation in any of New Zealand's football competitions. There has been cases of insider betting. I think the most recent one was 2022. But certainly there's already been 2 reports, I understand, this season of concern of potential approaches there. So it's definitely going on. Fortunately, there's been no evidence that there's been any fixed matches here.
Thank goodness. But is our framework, sporting, legal, whatever, strong enough to deal with it if it actually happened? Do you know?
I think the safeguards are in place there, and certainly there's the legal framework there. They made a change to the Crimes Act back in 2015 when New Zealand were preparing to host the Cricket World Cup. So that meant that there is, I guess, an avenue for criminal proceedings to take place if this does occur. But yeah, it's really untested. And these cases are also notoriously difficult to prove because it's cross borders, right? And it means that you're relying on these overseas agencies and information sharing agreements in place to be able to track down the people involved. And that requires sort of financial data, communications data. So often it is, unfortunately, the players that end up as being the lightning rods for these cases, and really they're acting on the instruction of nameless, faceless individuals overseas, and those are the ones that you actually do want to catch.
And they'll have gone to ground, disappear. Have we heard from Clayton? I mean, the man at the centre of this, anything from him?
No, he's not spoken publicly. We've only heard his side of the story through his lawyer and what we heard at the sentencing hearing. He did write a letter to the court as part of his sentencing in which he has apologised for his behaviour and, absolutely denounced his conduct. And he also offered an apology to his former club, Macarthur FC, New Zealand football, the All Whites, and just the wider football community as well. But obviously this has had a massive impact on his mental health. We heard evidence that he's been diagnosed with not only PTSD and a gambling addiction, he's suffered from what's described as a major depressive episode. So obviously it's a very challenging time for him at the moment, but I do think he's got a really interesting story to tell, and I think he could really help educate the wider public on the risks involved.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Dana Johansson. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benge. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.